afternoon, I'm Dee Griffin.
And I'm Renetta Dubose. Welcome to Hidden History 2018.
In this 30-minute special, we will focus on the accomplishments as well as trials and tribulations of African Americans here in the CSRA and across the nation.
And we are doing it at the historic Tabernacle Baptist Church on Laney Walker Boulevard in Augusta, Georgia.
Tabernacle Baptist Church was formally organized in August of 1885 by Dr. Charles T. Walker. C.T. Walker Magnet School in Richmond County is named after the doctor. In 1913, Tabernacle moved from Ellis Street to its current location on Laney Walker Boulevard.
Another religious powerhouse emerged in 1940, mapping Augusta's church future. We take a look at Reverend Essie Mae McIntyre and how she broke barriers from the pulpit.
Yes, they were in the Sunday school, and yes, they could sing on the choir.
Sunday morning church remains a staple in the black community, and those who attend Good Shepherd Baptist Church on Olive Road in Augusta can thank their fearless leader for reversing gender roles in the house of worship.
A lot of women were really beginning to feel a nudge or a pull to serve more in the church.
Bishop Rosa Williams pastors Ever Faithful Missionary Baptist Church on Sandbar Ferry Road in Augusta, an unimaginable feat prior to 1940. That's when her friend, Reverend Essie Mae McIntyre, started her journey to becoming the South's first female Baptist pastor.
At one time, in the Baptist church, women couldn't even go in the pulpit to clean it, less on to preaching.
Born in the Old Town section of Louisville, Georgia, McIntyre spent her childhood in Burke County and Sylacauga, Alabama before making the Garden City home. The early years were tough, filled with illness, but in April of 1940, she heard the call of God and transitioned her neighborhood club number 2 into Good Shepherd Baptist Church, and those first members voted her their pastor.
She would make you tremble. She talked about hell and heaven.
Reverend Oscar Brown knows McIntyre as his Aunt Maymay, his mother's sister. He says he still remembers helping with construction on the first brick building in 1951, a church that no longer had a wooden exterior. It still stands today on a street named in her honor. In 1940, Brown says Augusta Mayor James Woodall did believe and granted her a license to preach, but she still needed to be ordained.
No pastor would ordain her. And they even had a word put out that if they found out who did license her, that they would actually kill the person.
Reverend McIntyre was ordained in secret, one she took to the grave with her to protect the person who did it. And the sheriff at that time promised to arrest anyone who harmed her with a sign outside the church. But as a woman of cloth walking through the valley of the shadow of death, Reverend McIntyre feared no evil.
The 23rd song was her favorite, major favorite. As a matter of fact, that's why Good Shepherd is named Good Shepherd, because when he called her into the ministry, oh, bless your name, I'm getting excited. He told her, I'm the Good Shepherd.
And despite being called, she was shunned by many churches who would invite her to speak and turn her away from the pulpit when she arrived and they learned she was a woman. Bishop Williams, who traveled with McIntyre to various church conferences, says she was allowed to speak at a visiting church typically on Mother's Day, and it was almost always moved to another building, not inside the sanctuary. A few churches, such as Tabernacle Baptist Church and Thankful Baptist Church, complied.
My thing to her was, why would you go to these places when you know they don't want you there? And she would say, because it ain't about me. It's about the one who sent me.
As any good shepherd would do, Reverend McIntyre brought thousands to Christ. And the house that she built still stands, being led by the shepherd she chose, who accepted the torch from her.
Welcome back. We're inside historic Tabernacle Baptist Church with more hidden history.
And you know, Dee, President William Howard Taft, John D. Rockefeller, and Booker T. Washington visited. Moving on now to the story of the Amistad, one of the most captivating in our nation's history. And you know what, Dee, that slave rebellion and the subsequent court battle was one of the earliest in our country.
And they included a struggle for social change and racial equality. Scott McDonald has more on board the Amistad in Hidden History.
The Amistad was never meant to be a slave ship, but in 1839, off the coast of Cuba, that's what it became.
Slaves ended up on this boat by some owners that were a little bit shady, and took a last-minute purchase, and they were brought onto the vessel in the dead of night, shackled, dressed in sailor garb because they didn't want to get caught.
It was built for supplies and cargo, not human beings. Despite that, 53 African natives were packed onto the ship in extreme conditions. It wasn't long before the captives revolted. Led by Sengbe Pie, they took back the ship.
He's your average everyday farmer from Mende land. He's one of these ordinary people that's put in an extraordinary circumstance, and he rises to the occasion. He becomes the hero of the story.
Today at Connecticut's Mystic Seaport, a replica of the Amistad sails again, part of the Discovering Amistad initiative. Its mission is to make sure the story and its impact on the nation is never forgotten. It sits in a harbor not far from New London, Connecticut, where the original eventually ended up over 175 years ago.
When the Amistad landed in Connecticut, abolitionists were already organized and they jumped on the case immediately.
The Africans found themselves in a legal battle, even defended by former President John Quincy Adams. At that time, it was not a popular stance to take.
Yeah, there were a lot of people who were still very much in support of slavery at this time. It was extremely controversial, and some of the newspapers out of New York especially take a very different perspective, very unsympathetic to the Africans.
The highly publicized case made it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
But ultimately they decided they're from Africa, and as free men who had been kidnapped, they had every right to defend themselves and free themselves. And so the Supreme Court ultimately decided that they should be set free.
37 of the captives returned home to Africa in a trip funded by local abolitionists. But the court victory did not end slavery. Far from it.
The Amistad case actually didn't have that big of an impact on Supreme Court law, on precedent, but it was a symbolic case.
The painting of Sengbe Pie, who led the revolt on board the Amistad, became a beacon of hope for slaves all across the nation.
To tell us that progress is possible, that we can keep moving forward, and that there are people like Sengbe Pie and allies like John Quincy Adams and the abolitionists that helped them that are continually working for social change. And we see that today.
This is one of those shining moments for abolitionists and others who believe in real equality.
An example of the justice system working.
Being unbiased, being impartial, and allowing the small voice to be held at the same level as those in power.
Connecting the hope, the freedom, fought and won, to the ongoing struggle for social justice across America.
We're still seeing this social change happening through the courts, but then also with a massive amount of support from grassroots organizing and local activists, from children to lawyers to musicians to artists to poets. Everybody's working to make change, and that directly connects to the Amistad story.
Reporting at Mystic Seaport in Connecticut, Scott McDonald.
It's Black History Month, and for today's Hidden History, I traveled across the state to Brevard County to tell you the little-known story of Harry T. and Harriet Moore.
Welcome back to Hidden History 2018. And you know, Dee, there are so many pioneers of Black history. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X.
But there are so many other African Americans who paved the way for us to be where we are today.
Harry Tyson Moore was an educator and a pioneer civil rights movement leader. He also founded the first branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in Brevard County, Florida.
And he was born in November of 1905, but he died Christmas 1951 after a hate crime. Rod Carter has the story.
Before Martin, before Medgar, there were the Moores. Harry T. and Harriet V. Moore. The Moores were married civil rights activists from Mims, Florida, a tiny town along the Space Coast. It's just east of Orlando. On December 25th, 1951, someone placed sticks of dynamite underneath the front porch of their modest shotgun home.
That was the bomb that was heard around the world. Harry T. Moore passed away that day, and Harriet died 9 days later.
Harry Moore was the secretary of the NAACP. He routinely registered black voters. He stood up and spoke out against lynchings.
It's about 12 acres.
William Gary has dedicated the last several years of his life to this, the Harry T. and Harriet Moore Memorial Park and Museum.
This was all orange groves out here.
There's a replica of their home, complete with an icebox, wood-burning stove,
the radio that they had.
Touches of 1951. At the Moore Museum, take a brief walk through African American history.
And it's a very emotional thing with me.
It's been more than 66 years since that bomb exploded here in Brevard County. A bomb blast that everyone says was so loud it could be heard for miles and miles away. And to this day, no one's ever been brought to justice. In Mims, Florida, I'm Rod Carter.
I'm Annette Pegler. It's known as the first community in America founded exclusively for African Americans.
I think faith, family, and fortitude will be the mantra for the next 50 years or the next 150 years for this great place.
We'll tell you how the Orange Mound neighborhood in Memphis, Tennessee has been thriving since the early 1900s.
Now, let's head to Memphis, Tennessee, to the first community in the United States built by and for African Americans.
That's the historic Orange Mound community, where they marched through the 1890s, survived the civil rights movement and the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. several miles away.
There was so much love, so much innovation, so much community unity here.
If you want to learn about Orange Mound's history, you need to find native Mary Jones Mitchell.
Melrose is the only school in the nation that had 2 Olympic winners in 1988 in Seoul, Korea.
Shelby County Mayor Mark Luttrell recently named Jones Mitchell the historian of Orange Mound. She speaks with pride when talking about her community.
2 years ago, this was an abandoned liquor store.
Some of Jones Mitchell's most painful memories, however, are about the neighborhood during the civil rights movement. Her classmate Lillian Bumpus fought for equality.
We boycotted the department stores. We were not supposed to even receive the daily newspaper. The commercial appeal did not give blacks titles, Negroes as we would call them.
Throughout its history, black families in Orange Mound have turned to the church for refuge.
That's why it's so important for the church to be holistic in its outreach, in addition to partnering with the schools.
At times, Orange Mound was known for the wrong reasons. Dozens of Orange Mound natives are working hard to restore pride in this historic neighborhood.
I think faith, family, and fortitude will be the mantra for the next 50 years or the next 150 years for this great place.
Reporting from Orange Mound in Memphis, Tennessee, I'm Annette Pegler.
In 2015, Orange Mound received a national honor. President Obama gave the neighborhood the Preserve America Presidential Award. It honors a community which has best used its historic assets for economic development and community revitalization. There are also quite a few notable athletes who came from Orange Mound, all graduates of Melrose High School.
Barry Wilburn played for the Washington Redskins when they won Super Bowl 21. Cedric Wilson played for the Pittsburgh Steelers when they won Super Bowl 40, and Andre Lott Washington won a national championship with the University of Tennessee Volunteers in 1998.
Welcome back. The former mayor of Augusta, Bob Young, proclaimed July 15, 2001 as Tabernacle Baptist Church Consecration Celebration Day in the city of Augusta. In the mid-1800s, plantation owners in Edgefield, South Carolina did something not only illegal but unthinkable. They trained a slave how to read, write, and create pottery. Now, more than 100 years later, the work of Dave the Potter is uncovering history that a lot of people never knew. Deep inside the halls of the McKissick Museum on the campus of the University of South Carolina stand tall, majestic vessels, remnants of a dark time in Southern history, brought to light more than 150 years later through a slave named Dave.
He made functional wares because he had to, and that was his livelihood, or it was his master's livelihood, but he also found a way to make wares a vehicle for his own personal self-expression through the dating, the signing, and especially the rhymed couplets.
Dave was taught how to read and write, rare for slaves in the 1800s. Not much is known about Dave's life, but his work speaks for itself on huge jars and vessels with little messages.
Everything Dave wrote was off the cuff. These were things that happened in the moment. They were spontaneous, what we consider art should be, and they were on beautiful pieces that ensured his words lasted for 150 plus years.
It all started on this land, once known as Pottersville. A 115-foot kiln, the largest in America, is buried under this now hallowed ground. The area on the cusp of Edgefield, South Carolina, was the workplace of dozens of men like Dave who were shackled by slavery, but Dave found freedom in his craft.
Everybody wants to control their destiny in some way. Dave controlled clay. That was his freedom during those times.
That freedom came with a price, one that could have cost his life. For that reason, there was what's now considered a silent period from 1844 until around 1848.
The circumstances surrounding Edgefield, South Carolina, and being a slave at that time, he chose not to write on his pots, except for once, that we know of.
Potter Justin Guy grew up on land where Dave lived his last years of life. According to records, it's believed that Dave lived to be in his 70s and barely knew life beyond slavery. But long after his death, Dave still lives through his imprint on jars that have been seen and felt around the world.
We have 36 poems, which give us even more insight into the personality of Dave. So yes, every artist wants to live forever in some way. That was his ticket.
Pots Dave made for free are now being sold for millions of dollars and displayed in top museums of art. More than 100 years after his death, there's a resurrection of interest in Dave. In fact, in 2016, he was inducted into the South Carolina Hall of Fame.
He's special in our history annals, but he's special as an individual.
An individual who disappeared without a physical trace, but left a lasting impression on history and hearts.
We wish we had more, but we're grateful for what we have.
Even today, Dave's work continues to inspire and educate. A few years ago, he was inducted into the South Carolina Hall of Fame. And each year, in July, Edgefield, South Carolina honors Dave Day.
As you can see, there are a plethora of African Americans who were pioneers, and we stand on their shoulders. Many of them left footprints too in the CSRA.
So now is a great time for you to take a moment and find your hidden history. Thanks for joining us.